Thank you, Brit. Thank you very much. People came to see us.
Well, good evening. We appreciate your being here. That's great. This is too loud. Appreciate your being here. This is a very full group, but we could have filled it 3 times over. So many people requested seats. So you're incredibly fortunate. And in exchange for that, you watched a long commercial for the Center for Politics. That was the cost of attending tonight. And checks are made to the Center for Politics. You're laughing. I'm absolutely dead serious. But I appreciate your taking time out from buying up all the milk and bread and water in town. I went by today to get some. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I hope you're all satisfied. But it looks like we won't need it. We are just delighted that you have joined us for the start of our National Symposium Series on Democracy and the launch of the Center for Politics' 20th anniversary. And that's really amazing because 1998 doesn't seem that far away, but it is. The Center for Politics is delighted to partner with our friends at the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, along with individual event sponsors from across the university to bring this year-long series to you. We have over 24 events planned between now and May, and we hope to see many of you at others as well. Of course, we have an all-star panel here this evening, and we're delighted to invite them to discuss this pressing question. Has Donald Trump changed the presidency forever? That's a long time. So I guess maybe the answer is no on that, but we know he's changed it pretty dramatically, and we'll discuss that. We've assembled, as I said, an all-star panel this evening to talk about the changes that Donald Trump has generated, not just in the presidency, but beyond the presidency. And I'm going to introduce the panel now, and they have given me permission to be short. They have resumes, longer than most people's obituaries. So I'm not doing that. I told them only their mothers want to hear the whole thing, so they have agreed to do it, and I appreciate it because they really are distinguished. Symone Sanders is a strategist, communications consultant, CNN political commentator, and she served as a 2008 resident fellow at Harvard at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. You probably know her from CNN, but you also know her and remember her as National Press Secretary for Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. She has been very prominent since then and quite prominent on CNN and in other groups as well, and we're delighted to have you here this evening, Symone. Thank you for joining us. Mark Short, and again, long resume, and I was disappointed to see nowhere in there did you mention that you had been a student of mine, and that hurt. It really did hurt, and so I'm probably, no, not at all, and I'm probably going to be even shorter because you didn't include that. No one would know this, but he was recently appointed by the Miller Center as a senior fellow for the current academic year. But he's here tonight with the Center for Politics. Now, he served, as you know, as assistant to the president and director of legislative affairs at the White House for President Trump. And goodness knows, I saw more of you than I did any other single person on Sunday morning. I felt like you were still here because I kept watching you on the Sunday shows. And you're still there, come to think of it. I saw you not long ago. He is a member of the Trump he was a member of the Trump administration. He is now in a private business in Northern Virginia, but is also doing some other things, and that includes his resident fellowship here at the University of Virginia's Miller Center. I do want to mention that Mark graduated, and I'm sorry to tell you this, from Washington and Lee. But clearly, you didn't know about the University of Virginia back then. So when he was getting ready to do his business degree, of course he came to the Darden School. But he already knew he loved politics, and he came and took a politics class with me. And he told me, I asked him if he remembered. He says, absolutely, I remember it. I got an A. Say that's the you give students an A or an F, and they always remember. That's how it works. Ana Navarro. We all know Ana from various incarnations over the years. She's a Republican strategist and a political analyst for CNN. She's a political contributor to ABC's The View. She has been named the Republican Power Consultant throughout the country, and she's been...
That was before.
That was before. That's okay.
That's a little dated.
It's still on the resume. It's perfectly okay. Interestingly, she did work for McCain in 2008. She was a national surrogate for Senator McCain's first or successful presidential campaign for the nomination, and she served on Governor Jeb Bush's transition team when he was elected governor. I think this is very interesting. She was born in Nicaragua, and in 1980, as a result of the Sandinista revolution, she and her family immigrated to the United States. That's a dirty word, but I had to use it, and it was in quotes. She immigrated.
Legally.
Legally. I wasn't going to ask. You know, I'm a 2018 man. All right, Brit Hume. Brit Hume currently serves as a senior political analyst for Fox News Channel. He's a regular panelist on Fox's weekly public affairs program, Fox News Sunday, and he contributes to all the major political coverage. Before joining Fox News in 1996, Brit was with ABC News for 23 years, serving as chief White House correspondent for many of those years. Earlier in his career, he reported for UPI, and he was also a newspaper writer. Brit, most importantly, is a graduate of the University of Virginia. And in his class, there you go, in his class was none other than Fred Barnes. This is how that got started. And they formed Fox News. It didn't air until Roger Ailes and others provided the money. But they were playing TV for years prior to Fox News being established, and I didn't think that was funny either. Brit, it's great to see you again. All right, now, I am required to do this by the university, and it's something that I'm not familiar with, but nonetheless, we're going to do it. I have to say a quick word about security. Attendance at tonight's event is obviously maxed out. I know many of you feel passionately about many of the topics that we'll discuss this evening, and that's great. We want that. As I always tell my students, politics is a good thing, but that doesn't mean that everything about politics or politicians is easy or rosy. Disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. I'm going back to Catholic school and the nuns somehow in my mind. Disruptive behavior will not be tolerated, and anyone engaging in such behavior will be asked to leave. We can't use corporal punishment, but you will be asked to leave. If you do not leave immediately, you will be in violation of both the university's standards of conduct and the law of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I hope that has chilled every one of you. We're not going to have another Kavanaugh hearing here in the ballroom of the University of Virginia. So let's get started. We've got some questions that we're dying to have them answer. And here's the first one, and this is extraordinary. It's a book. It's a book by Bob Woodward. You can criticize it all you want, Mark. And normally, I never push books that weren't written by me. But this is an exception, and probably many of you will read it, and it's clearly had an impact, as few books really do. Now, I realize you probably haven't had a chance to look at anything other than excerpts, but I'd like to know, as our opening question, what parts struck you from your own sources, your independent sources, beyond what Woodward included? Which parts struck you as being on target, and which parts struck you as being wrong? We'll just go down the row here. Symone.
So thank you for having me here today. Is my mic on? I'm on. Thank you for having me here today. I'm super excited to be here. I have not read the Woodward book. I did order the book, and it is at the concierge of my apartment. But I have seen excerpts, and I think what struck me about the book is the level of detail and the stories that people supposedly told. As a communications professional, as someone who has worked on campaigns and works with people now, I find it chilling that folks supposedly inside the White House that work for the administration are willing to speak so freely and so critically about the president and their colleagues on the record.
That's a very good point. Although they say Woodward has a great technique.
His sourcing is very iffy. I mean, it's very vague. I'm not iffy. I don't want to say iffy, but his sourcing is vague. Yeah. I mean, his sourcing has always been like that. If you read any of the other Woodward books, that is how he does his sourcing, and people but people become critical of it, but he is also very well sourced. He's recorded everything supposedly, and Omarosa has tapes. I wouldn't be surprised if Bob Woodward has a tape or two of his own that he wants to drop. So I think that's what struck me most about the book. I will say I'm not necessarily surprised about what is in there, because many of the things that has been, allegedly that's in the book that Bob Woodward wrote are things that we've seen from press reports over the last couple months. So
They also say that the rap on Woodward is that if you want good treatment, you have to spill the beans. He rewards you if you participate, and if you refuse to, your coverage is negative. It works. I understand. It's okay. Mark Short, which parts do you find accurate?
It won't surprise you, Larry, that I have not read the book, nor do I plan to order the book.
Well, here, you can have this one.
Thanks.
hello, gift.
You want to sign it for me?
Sure, yeah. I'll sign Bob Woodward.
I think that we've had a series of these over the first 18 months, whether it was Fire and Fury, it's Omarosa's book, it's Bob Woodward's book. And I think that inside the Beltway of DC, there continues to be a shock about how this White House operates. And 18 months in, at some point, you would think that that shock would a little bit be diluted. I think the American people elected a president knowing he operates in a different style, believing that what was happening in our country was incredibly dysfunctional. I think in 2016, we had probably the most talented field of Republican candidates we've had in many, many election cycles. And the fact that Donald Trump was able to defeat all of them, I think was a sign that American people were frustrated, believing that what was happening in Washington, D.C. was no longer representative of them. And Symone may not agree with this assessment, but I haven't said it yet. I remember campaigning up in New Hampshire and seeing Sanders yard signs with Trump yard signs. And I think there was a growing sense on both the left and the right that what was happening in Washington, D.C. was no longer working for the American people. And they wanted to elect somebody who would disrupt it and change it. And no one can sit here and argue that the Trump White House operates in the way previous White Houses have. And I've counseled that I think that a lot of the focus the administration puts on the New York Times op-ed or on the Woodward book is misplaced. They should be focusing not on the process of the way things are happening, but actually the results of what's been achieved. And I think if you look over the last 18 months, whether you agree or disagree with this president, when you look at historic tax relief, you look at the total reform and regulations, you look at promises that were made on the international front, what he promised he would do with the Iran nuclear deal, what he promised he would do with the Paris climate deal. You look at what he promised on Supreme Court justices, and now having confirmed more circuit court judges in the first 2 years than any president in history, with a second Supreme Court justice soon to be confirmed within a couple of weeks. He's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And so while there's a lot of consternation about the process and the way it operates, at some point, I think we also have to look at what is actually being achieved in this presidency.
You see why they put him on the Sunday shows? He was smooth, he was polished, he didn't answer the question. It was perfect. You deserve that A. I will not take it back. Okay, thank you, Mark. Let's go to Anna.
What struck me most about the Woodward book, and actually I bought 2 copies so that I don't have to share mine. First, it's amazing what Donald Trump has done for book publishing, right? Michael Wolff, Omarosa, Bob Woodward, and today Stormy Daniels said on The View that she's going to write a book, a tell-all book about her night with Trump. I hear it's going to be very short. But it's not the size that matters. I think she's thinking of calling it 50 Shades of Orange. Anyways, I digress. What struck me, and I just began reading it on the plane. I haven't, I've only read a few pages. What struck me is, despite the fact that we've seen a lot of books on this White House from very different types of authors, right? Michael Wolff, to me, is a gossip columnist. It read like a National Enquirer or a New York, Page 6. Omarosa, she's a savvy self-promoter, opportunist. Bob Woodward is a credible journalist with decades of experience and known the world over for what he did with Watergate. But they've all been consistent in portraying an image, a White House that is chaotic and that is dysfunctional. In the Woodward book, he gets to the backstory of things that we've been hearing for a long time. It's not, it's not news breaking that he is saying that the chief of staff called Donald Trump, his boss, the president, an idiot. In fact, we've been hearing this, about Rex Tillerson, who called him an effing moron, and I think the effing wasn't for fantastic. So it's, it's the consistency of what we have been hearing in tidbits. So I guess what strikes me is the level of leaking out of this White House from day one until today with that anonymous New York Times op-ed that they have not been able to control. I think it's better today than it was under Reince Priebus, but it's still going on. And it's a consistent image of a chaotic, dysfunctional White House and unstable precedent.
Thank you, Anna. Brit.
When Bob Woodward's first book, published with Carl Bernstein back in 1973, All the President's Men came out, an issue was raised by it, and that continues to be the issue with Bob Woodward's work all the way through all the books, and he's written a dozen and more, remains the same, and that is that he does something that most journalists do not do in this sense. I used to be an investigative reporter, and back in the day we had a saying, which was, you want your stories to be exclusive, but you don't want them to remain exclusive. And that is the issue with much of Bob Woodward's work. It remains exclusive to him because sometimes that changes because people write memoirs or they come out later on and they describe things as he did. But for much of what he reports, that hasn't happened and doesn't happen, which means that the credibility of the work hangs entirely on him, because it's not sourced. It's not. People say I have no doubt he has sources. I have no doubt he has transcripts. I have no doubt he has tapes. But we don't get to hear the tapes, we don't get to read the transcripts, and we don't get to know the identity of the sources. This means that the material remains essentially unverified. Now, I have no doubt, personally, that much of what he describes in that book is real. That people said these things, that subordinates to President Trump were critical of him in the way that Woodward describes. But there's a missing piece in all this when we think about it, and that is this. Mark touched on this. We have the portrait here of an utterly chaotic White House who presided over by this man-child of limited knowledge of government, of a tendency to be explosive in his reactions to things, and you have the sense of a man of reckless impulses that his staff are forever trying to restrain him from. When you think about that for a minute, that's a good thing. You want staff in there to do that. That's part of what staff does for every president, although perhaps not to the extent with this one. What's missing here, as you look to how to react to this book, is any connection between the process that he describes and the results, the kind of disastrous results that one would expect from a reckless process or a reckless president. Now, it may be that there are policies that one disagrees with. There certainly, as far as I'm concerned, there certainly are. But none of the policies and actions that I can put a finger on of any consequence that has to do with governance could be described as out of bounds or reckless or somewhere outside the 240-yard line. I just don't think it's there.
Go ahead.
I think there's a couple things going on here. I think people expect that because the White House is chaotic, that should automatically change the minds of the supporters of the president. I actually don't think there's if you support the president, I don't think there's anything the president could do to make you feel otherwise. But I reject the notion that there's nothing that's happened in this White House that is connected to the chaos that's going on and chaos in government. There are kids in cages on the border. I don't care what side of the aisle you are on politically. I don't think anyone is advocating for putting kids in cages. Even the White House came out and fumbled around about the kids being in cages on the border, separating children from their families. And so I think there are a number of things we can't point to. Like, look, I said this on Jake Tapper the other day. The White House has there's some good numbers with the economy. That's not what they're talking about. And even when the numbers are good, the president still fumbles it up by injecting non-truth lies into there. So I think it's a culmination of things that will come to a head maybe sooner, maybe later. But I think what is happening inside, I really don't know if we can really make the case that the chaos in the White House really doesn't mean anything because things are getting done. Okay, well I think in less than 60 days there's a midterm election where there are a number of people that are going to go to the polls. And contrary to popular belief, Democrats are not running on, we hate Donald Trump. We don't hate Donald Trump, we don't like your policies. And Democrats across the country are running on saying, look, the Republicans in Congress have not done their due diligence. Put us in charge, and we will put a check on this president, and we will get something done. And yeah, I know there was a tax cut, but the GDP is up, but wages are flat and declining in some places. And folks in Mount Bayou, Mississippi don't care about GDP. So I think it will come to a head sooner than later. But Donald Trump is a key ingredient in all of this, and I just really do not believe that he can continue to act in the way that he has acted and conduct his White House, his administration in the way that he has, and he will be met with zero consequences.
The last wage increase on Friday that was announced showed a 2.9% wage increase across the country, which was the largest in 10 years.
Yes, but the gap between the richest people in this country and the poorest people in this country is still a chasm for so many people. And so you want to talk about the tax cut. The tax cut didn't boost people's wages. They gave tax cuts to corporations that then didn't automatically raise wages across their various companies. They gave people bonuses. And so yes, one-off bonuses every now and then, a few extra $100 on your taxes over the next 2 years, but what happens in year 3?
Data just came out this week. It says America now has the highest median income in its history.
But we could do this all day.
No, I'm going to
but
say.
all I'm saying is, there are
already
people
lost
across the
me,
country
so
that
let's
do
get.
not believe this is true. And that coupled with the chaos coming, I know the data. I do data, Mark. I do data. I count. I do data all the time. I count numbers on a regular basis. Thank you.
Isn't part of the problem for Trump and for his administration is that this is the first presidency defined by tweets, which by their very nature are short, often misleading or outright inaccurate. They don't tell you much except about the president. And that's how most people get their impressions of Donald Trump. They certainly don't talk to the chief of staff, and they don't have access to the staff members to get these inside stories. And for all the books being sold, a lot of them are coffee table books that will rarely be cracked. Let's be honest, that's what people do. I love that. I hope you will continue to buy coffee table books that you will never read. But isn't that one of the fundamental problems? There are a lot of problems, not saying that's the only one, but the tweets are bizarre. I mean,
Well, Larry,
go ahead, Brit.
This president is not the most mature person who ever held the office, and one has to imagine that were his Twitter feed not available to him, that he would find some other way to get in his sandbox and make these adolescent utterances. And it's almost as if we have in the White House now 2 Donald Trumps. There's the one who actually goes downstairs and sits in meetings and takes decisions and gets some results, and if you're a conservative in particular, they're pretty good. And if you look at just the economic numbers that Mark was just pointing to, median income and the rest of it, growth numbers are exceptional. You can make the conclusion that he's doing pretty well. And then it is as if he goes to the residence and becomes a doppelganger and gets in the sandbox and publishes these tweets, which may thrill his base, but for a lot of times get him into a lot of gratuitous trouble that he could easily avoid. What you see in him is a man who has difficulty seeing past himself. I mean, he is utterly self-absorbed, to the point, for example, when he says that the Mueller investigation is a witch hunt. I have no doubt what he's thinking. He's thinking about the Mueller investigation as it pertains to him. He's not thinking about the Mueller investigation as it was when it began under James Comey and was taken up by him, which was a serious investigation, a counterintelligence investigation to determine what exactly the Russians did to try to influence this election. I think that report is coming, and I think it may or may not have much to do with him. But that's the important piece of it. That is certainly no witch hunt. But when he thinks about it, he thinks about things as they pertain to him. And he can't see past that. It is remarkably immature, but so far it hasn't proved crippling.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, when you take a look at yesterday, and on a day that's a somber day in American history, 9/11, he gets asked, and also a somber day because much of the East Coast is preparing for a monster hurricane to hit, and he gets asked about Puerto Rico, and he gives himself an A+ and calls it an unsung success of this administration. How you can call anything where 3,000 Americans died any level of success is beyond anything I can comprehend. But I don't comprehend him. I don't comprehend his immaturity and his narcissism and his need to make everything about himself. You asked about the tweets. It's changed the presidency. But the question is, when you ask the overall question that you asked at the beginning of this discussion, has Donald Trump changed the presidency? The answer is yes, definitely yes. The question that I have, though, is can anybody other than Donald Trump, any other president in the future, get away with that kind of behavior? Donald Trump said and did 50 things during the campaign that would have killed any other campaign. DOA, dead on arrival. But it did not do anything to him. In fact, he kept going. He has done 100 things and said 100 things and tweeted 100 things as president that would have crippled any other presidency. What we've also seen, though, is, in my view, a complete and abject failure by the Republican Congress to provide checks and balances. I am not sure that if you had a president tweeting the level of insane things he's been tweeting, I mean, yesterday was 9/11, and this guy gets up and starts tweeting against the DOJ and the FBI at 7 o'clock in the morning. Really, what he needs is more sleep. If we could just get him like 10 hours sleep, a lot of things could be avoided. And I can't imagine Congress looking the other way and being silent upon some of these things, but it's become the modus operandi for the Republican Congress, and I think the reason they're going to pay a price in November.
Why would you want, as a Congress, or as a majority in Congress, not to work with a president who has basically, with 3 notable exceptions, adopted your agenda? Taxes, regulation, judges, not just Supreme Court justices either, a whole host of judges at the appellate and trial level as well, which has been a key cause for the Republican Party for as long as I can remember. Guns, religious freedom, the list goes on. Now, he's different from standard Republican orthodoxy on immigration. He's different from standard Republican orthodoxy on trade. And he, like the party generally, but it used to be Republican orthodoxy to care a hell of a lot about spending and the deficit, and the president seems utterly unconcerned about those things. But by and large, for the most part, the question arises, and I know you want to get to this, Larry, about the effect he's had on the party, and has he changed the party of Reagan and the party of Lincoln forever? I would say that it can make a pretty good argument that the party's had more effect on him than he's had on it. And remember this about presidents and their parties. There was a time, not too long ago, when presidents were creatures of parties. Nowadays, in the modern system with the primaries and the rest of it, parties are the creatures of the president. The president appoints the chairman. The party apparatus in Washington, and to a great extent around the country, is utterly responsive to the president. He controls it. Now, I think that his impact on the Republican Party will last as long as he's president. And when he's not president anymore, the politics of the day will dictate what the next president makes of the next leader of the Republican Party or candidate makes of it. Because remember, in order to get elected president, you have to take control of the party. You have to get delegates elected to the party's convention, its governing body, who in a majority support you. And when you have that, you got the party,
But
and you control it.
he's creating a lasting effect because he is affecting the primary results.
Well,
Ron DeSantis is the nominee for governor of Florida
because
of Donald Trump.
And that will last as long as Trumpism, as we know it, lasts.
Oh, God, I hope so.
I actually don't think so. I think the effects of Donald Trump will be felt long after he's gone. But I think you bring up an interesting point.
Then you believe that Trump is more a cause of our politics today or a result of it?
I think like President Obama said recently, I think he's a symptom.
Okay.
I think Donald Trump is a symptom, but I do think that the things that he has been the things that he's done are not things that will be undone overnight, and he has forever moved the goalposts. So while, yes, there are things that Donald Trump did in 2016 and even now that would have previously been political suicide for other people, I would venture to say you can now tweet whatever the hell you want as a candidate. I don't want my principals tweeting like that, but you can, and will not be met with much consequence. I would venture to say you can push the envelope. I think one of the things Donald Trump did is expose how much of the presidency is really just agreed to protocol and no real codified process. Like, Donald Trump is just going about it the way that he wants to go about it, and there is nothing there to check him except Congress. They have totally abdicated their responsibility. I do not think that people that are calling for the Republican Congress to be a check on the president and execute their constitutional duty as oversight are asking them to roll over and play Democrat for a day. I'm not. But I do think that there's something to be said when people send you to Washington and you don't do your job. And so I think that is the effect, a part of the effect that the Trump presidency is going to have on Republicans across the country. That there will be a change in the sea tide in the House come November. There will be a change in governorships across the country, in state legislatures. And that will be felt for a very long time, but Donald Trump has a key base that is not turning away from him. I frankly don't think that base is enough to sustain him. But what about those people that are not letting go of Trumpism?
But
those folks aren't going anywhere.
You talked about, and I think you're right, you talked about policy issues, trade, tariffs, immigration, judges, healthcare, issues where people, where Republicans agree with Trump, and why would Congress not want to vote and work with him? Thing is, I'm old enough to remember when Republicans also stood for Christian and family values. And right now they're willing to, I'm so old, I even remember when Republicans were against adulterer precedents. And now somehow,
When was that?
oh, I don't know.
For the younger people here, they might not know.
Ask Hillary. And
Ask
now
Hillary.
we are in a place where it has become acceptable to cheat on your wife with a Playboy bunny and a stripper simultaneously. And Christian right leaders are calling it a mulligan. That is surreal. That is not the Republican Party that we used to belong to and grew up in. And so, he has, so I look at that now and I think to myself, well, these people now can't kind of, start talking about Bill Clinton or so-and-so or whomever the future might do that. I mean, remember when Mark Sanford had to resign from being governor because he hiked the Appalachian Trail?
The larger question about that is
Larry, I'm not really sure which
Mark, I know
question
why
you-
you're staying silent, but I'm not going to let you get away with it.
No,
Mark,
I'm happy. I don't know which question's on the table at this point. but let me
Anyone
try
of
to
them.
address
Just
a
go
few.
with it.
I think is whether or not Donald Trump has changed the presidency. I think, candidly, every president has changed the presidency in their own way. I think Obama changed the presidency. I think Bush changed the presidency. Will it ever be the same? It will never be the same. It never has been in our history. When you look back, sorry, I'll try and speak louder for those of you. Is there a way to turn up my mic too, if whoever has it? I see a few hands back there asking to speak louder. But I think if you look at changing of the presidency, you go back, Ronald Reagan was a response to Jimmy Carter. I think that George W. Bush was a response to Bill Clinton, and I certainly think Donald Trump was a response to Barack Obama. And after the Trump presidency finishes, I think you'll see a response to that. Whoever succeeds Trump will have a very different way of operating that I assume will be what some on this panel will consider more traditional and what they would consider more normal. The American people sent him there for an intentional reason, to disrupt the way Washington works. By its nature, when you disrupt it, after you've disrupted it, you can't just keep disrupting it. People will want to return to what they thought is a way forward. And I think he is very effectively doing what the American people asked him and elected him to go do. And I think there'll be a response to that. And the next character of the next president will be a response to Donald Trump. I have no doubt about that, whether that's a Republican or a Democrat. Other issues that we've discussed, I think we talk about the record of achievement of Republicans, and is he just following the same agenda as Republicans? Here's where I'll tell you I think he's different. I think, as Brit said, he's done the things other Republicans have wanted to do with judges, and deregulation, and taxes. But there are other things he's done that people campaigned on who never did. How many times did you hear a Republican president promise that if elected, or Democrat president promise, if elected, I will move the embassy to Jerusalem?
Oh, for decades.
How many times have you heard presidents make the claim that, Republicans in particular, who have said that, we want to explore all natural resources, including the Anwar? That's been happening since 1984, there's been a ban. This president broke through where Reagan and Bush couldn't. There's been time after time when there are things this president promised he'd do where I think other advisors said, wait a second, you're going to upset some of the middle voters on this. Don't do that. This president looks at it and says, I'm going to keep delivering for the people who elected me here, and I'm going to do what they asked me to do. And I think it's very much looking at it sometimes like a retailer. Here are my customers, and I'm going to keep delivering down to them. Some will argue that's not going to help you get 50% plus one in a re-election. We'll wait and see. But for right now, he continues to deliver on what he promised he would do for the American people. So we talk about, disconcerting about process, but it's hard to argue that he's not doing what he campaigned on and he promised the American people he would do.
I actually agree with you on that. I think he is keeping a lot of his promises. Look, I think we don't talk about the economic numbers don't rule the day. It's not about the economy, stupid, because a large swath of Americans, the majority of Americans, have decided that character matters, that morality matters, that fitness to serve matters, that humanity matters, that basic decency matters, that human empathy matters, that when a national hero dies, you should put down the flag at half-mast, that you should not celebrate like if you are celebrating a touchdown by your team on 9/11 when you see some supporters, that you should not equate neo-Nazis and those that protest against them as good people. And so despite the fact that the economic numbers are good and they're getting even better, growing on what Obama had already started to do, he keeps losing numbers. And I think it's because people knew they'd elected a disruptor. What they didn't know is that they'd elected a destroyer. They didn't know they elected a divider and that he would continue doing this even as president.
I know Obama now wants to take credit for the Trump economy too, but we keep forgetting that during the 8 years of the Obama presidency, GDP grew at 1.8%. That is a factual data point, 1.8% over 8 years. The economy now 4.2% the last quarter. So we can say that was the Obama economy. I think most voters don't view it that way.
And he's still at 35% approval. Because the country does not want somebody that fabricates out of thin air culture wars and keeps dividing the country into two bands. They don't want to see fights every day about athletes taking a knee in the national anthem. They don't want to hear black countries called shitholes. They don't want to be told that Puerto Rico is an unsung success. So the numbers you're saying are true. But it is also true that the American people care about values.
All right. It's okay to applaud. It's fine with me, as long as it doesn't get out of hand. When you're moderator of an all-star panel, what you most hope for is that the panel will run itself. And that's exactly what's been happening. But Occasionally, I'm going to interrupt and ask a question. I apologize in advance if I interrupt somebody's riff. But I want to get back to what we were talking about originally, but expand it a bit and talk about the New York Times anonymous op-ed writer who supposedly was, quote, a senior administration official in the Trump administration. And I'm not going to ask you who it was, because everybody's just a guessing game, unless someone wants to confess. It's okay, make good news, you know, if anybody did. I don't know who I'm looking at, but no, he was already out of the administration. I'm kidding him because he got an A.
Things could be published after the fact.
Yeah, it's possible, but he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do that. I know him. What I really want to hear from you is whether you think this was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do by the individual who did it, and then was it the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do by the New York Times? Brit?
I would say if you're an official inside the Trump administration and you're working to restrain this president from his most reckless impulses, you are doing the Lord's work. But I would also say that if you turn around then and take that information public, attack the president, and give yourself and your colleagues credit for his achievement, you are not doing the Lord's work. I don't think this was a public service to put this out there. I don't think it helps the cause of those within the administration who are trying to keep the president to the extent possible on the straight and narrow. And I don't really find fault with the New York Times for publishing it. Hell, I mean, it's an op-ed. It is what it is. I mean, Bob Woodward, in one of the most ironic moments of recent weeks, said that he thought it didn't meet the standards to publish this anonymous information. And I don't doubt, look, Bob's a friend of mine. I like him, I always have, and in many ways I admire him, but that was kind of absurd.
The next Bob Woodward book will be about Brit Hume. And we'll know where it started.
But Larry, if I talk to him, I'll be all right.
True enough, true enough.
Look, just the joy of watching the clip of Donald Trump trying to say the word anonymous. Have you guys seen this clip? Oh, for God's sakes, go Google it. It's worth, whatever the hell is going on with this New York Times op-ed. Look, the New York Times, it is the most clicked on op-ed I was hearing on the radio that they've had in recent years, probably in history, because people didn't used to click on op-eds. Now with social media, we do. On the one hand, it puts the fear of God in my heart. On the other, because, it's credible. What this guy or woman is saying in this op-ed is credible. On the other hand, it kind of feels very narcissistic by the author. I think it's somebody that's going to eventually want to write a book or out themselves and want to say, I was on the right side of history, or is somehow trying to appease their conscience. They like working in the White House. They like the power that comes with that. They like the fame. They like going to the White House Christmas parties. They're good. I used to go to them. But they don't have the guts to resign and protest. I have friends who work in this administration, and I have friends who, and I'll name them because I don't believe in anonymous. Alex Acosta, Secretary of Labor, Cuban-American immigrant. Elaine Chao, Secretary of Transportation, Chinese immigrant. I have been appalled and shocked that these people who I know to be decent and care tremendously about immigration have not quit this administration over children being kept in cages in the border. I have been shocked that Gary Cohn didn't quit when Charlottesville happened, that they all stood there behind him and nobody resigned. That to me is disappointing. So I wish that this person who wrote this op-ed would have the guts to quit and tell us why he quit and then publish it. But resign and protest. Send us a message that way.
Well, Anna, it's possible that individual had signed an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, or or non-disparagement. I'm going to assert myself as moderator. Non-disparagement agreement, which are common in business, in government, I think they're pretty much unheard of, but apparently the Trump administration has had a number of people sign NDAs. And Mark, I hate to pick on you, but I've got to. Did you sign any such agreement? Did your colleagues sign any such agreement? Non-disclosure agreement or non-disparagement agreement, which would include the family and their businesses, which means everything. I think they practically own, good 20% of the world, something like that. Did that happen with your colleagues? Did it happen with you? And what does it really mean?
I'm not familiar with anybody in the administration signing a non-disparagement agreement, Larry. There was a document that when we started, we signed that I think models other administrations' policies on national security that says we will not disclose national security secrets. We will not disclose confidential conversations we have with the president. It goes on to say something about if you choose to violate this and write a book, that the proceeds of that book will benefit American taxpayers and go to the federal government and not go to your own personal bank account. Additionally, before I signed on as a commentator at CNN or joined the Miller Center, I asked White House ethics lawyers that I have free clearance to give an unvarnished opinion of my opinions of what's happened in the administration or what happened. And I have absolute full license to do that. It's the way I've operated every day since, and it's the way I'll continue to operate.
That's the answer, and I've been wondering, a lot of people have. You saw the Washington Post article this morning about the NDAs. So here you have a concrete example by someone who's being honest with us, and I appreciate that.
Omarosa, and I don't know, when the hell I became Team Omarosa, I don't even know. But, but Omarosa's getting sued for saying things. And by the way, I think what she did was unethical. I think sticking a recorder down your bra and going into the Situation Room is unethical and illegal, and it should not be allowed.
I'm going to turn this off. I'm sorry.
If you stick it down your bra, I'm going to be very concerned.
And Mark wanted, and I should do it, because I asked you a particular question. You've got an answer coming to another question.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
There was a question about the New York Times rather than Omarosa, so let me try to address that one. The New York Times, for me, being able to have the opportunity every day to walk into the West Wing was an incredible honor. I feel like I'm serving the American people in doing that. 63 million people voted for this president. More than 300 electoral votes elected him president. I think it requires enormous arrogance for somebody to say, it is my job to put my opinions above 63 million Americans and try to subvert the will of an administration. To what Brit said, though, I think there's a different way to do this. We all as staff have a responsibility to tell the president our honest opinion about a policy he may or may not choose. And many occasions I went in and told the president, I think this is smart, I think this is not smart. Of course, in many occasions, he told me I was wrong. In some occasions, perhaps he accepted the advice. But that's our job as staffers. That's the way you handle it. You go to the principal and say, here's where I agree or here's where I disagree. The incredible arrogance of writing something to say, here I am, hold me up, New York Times, because I know you hate Trump too, hold me up as an unsung hero, is ridiculous. And I have no reason to doubt that that person wants to be outed sometime in the near future, or else they wouldn't have gone to the New York Times. There's plenty of critics on the conservative side in the Wall Street Journal, the Weekly Standard, the National Review, other places that have expressed concerns about the administration's policies. The fact the person chose to go to the New York Times gives me every indication this person wants the public acclaim and to one day be outed. Our job is to serve the president. He's the one who's been duly elected by the American people. And if you have people in any White House, Republican or Democrat, who say it's my job to ignore the will of 63 million Americans and to take the agenda and hijack it, that is incredibly dangerous and wrong. No matter what Anna may think about the president's policies, that is dead wrong. It'd be wrong in an Obama administration, in a Clinton administration, a Bush administration, or in a Trump presidency.
Brit.
There's an interesting political debate going on and somewhat below the radar on the right these days about what is the proper way for conservatives to respond to this president. There are serious, well-known conservatives who believe that this Bill Kristol, David Frum, the list goes on, who believe that this president is so far beyond the pale that to serve him or his administration is simply to enable him, and people should not do it. I have a different view of that. I think that this president in particular needs the best people possible around him, and that it is a kind of high form of patriotism to try to go and serve this president as Mark did. And that the process that he described, where you take your case to the president, or he asks for it, and you make your best argument, and hope he responds to it in a sensible way, is the way that it works. And I think to a greater extent than we may imagine when we hear this president laying about himself with all sorts of nonsense and mendacity, that's to a great extent what seems to be happening. And that the people who say they're scared by the Trump administration can probably safely come out from under their beds and live in an America which, broadly speaking, is doing pretty well at the moment.
Any other comment on that before we go on? Symone.
So I believe that the person that wrote this op-ed, one, should have put their name on it. And if you are working for a principle that you feel as though you no longer align with, I believe you should quit. And then be free to say your piece. And I also think that the op-ed doesn't go far enough. I think if this person and people that work within the administration are truly think that they're the only thing standing between us and going over the cliff, then I think they need to go to Congress now. Again, I've noted Congress has failed to be a real check on this president. So perhaps that's why the op-ed writer didn't go. All that to be said, I think we can have a whole conversation about should the president have written it, should they not have written it. I think the content of the op-ed, though, is something quite interesting. And there are serious concerns that the op-ed writer raises that are not just the views of the op-ed writer, but as we know, are views that many people have that serve in and outside of, and that do not serve the administration. So quite like, if there were active conversations being had about the 25th Amendment, that means that a number of people in the White House or even in the cabinet at some point in time thought the president was unfit to serve. I think that's something we should be talking about. So I actually don't want to lament to find out who the op-ed writer is. I'm more concerned about the content and why this person felt it was needed to write an anonymous op-ed, take it to the New York Times. Why are there so many people that work inside the administration feel as though they are the only thing helping hold up our democracy?
You know, the other thing I don't understand why Jeff Sessions has to quit. I mean, for no other reason than self-dignity. Donald Trump is the only human being alive who could make me feel any degree of sympathy for Jeff Sessions.
Because he's getting his job done.
The man has become a human piñata. And you know, how can you then have the gravitas to go out there and be the secretary, you know, the attorney general, when you get publicly humiliated on a daily basis? Same thing for DHS secretary. She got berated in front of everybody in a cabinet meeting. Were you there?
I was not.
Man, you missed all the good stuff.
I was actually finalizing a deal at Capitol Hill on tax cuts. You know.
Well,
So
you know,
be
and so
careful. He remembers.
So when your initial question.
I hope he remembers it's the one thing. One of the one big things that the administration, along with Congress, was able to get done.
I know.
So yes, you should definitely tout those tax cuts until they are not politically popular
Two Supreme
anymore.
Court justices in 2 years, the first time in American history. 36 circuit court judges, the first time in American history. Total deregulation that gets the economy going. Repealing the individual mandate. I know it's the only thing we got done. The only thing that's happened in the first 18 months of this presidency. There's been nothing else.
No
Mark,
blows have been struck. Keep it in
know.
perspective. No blows have been struck. I'm going to ask one other question, but before I do, I want those of you with questions to prepare them, and we have two people with mics who can run to you. Where are two people with the mics? Where are you? Okay, there's one back there. Where's the other one? He died. Okay. Well, we at least have one. So if you have a question, be ready to stick your hand up and wait until the mic gets to you so that everyone can hear what you're asking. And the final question that I have for you, well, I'll go back if we have time left over if they run out of questions, but I don't think this group is going to. Look, we all know politics can be dishonest. That's a shock. If my students, please, will put their fingers in their ears, I don't want you to hear this. But politics can be dishonest, and politicians, this is the hard part, can lie. They've done so. They've been known to lie over the years. And again, I hope I haven't offended anybody by saying that. So, but there are degrees of lying. or misrepresenting or whatever you want to call it, okay? And I think it's a legitimate point that needs to be addressed and isn't being addressed by the Trump administration. I'm friends with not just Mark, I'm friends with Kellyanne Conway and have been for many, many years, and you all have an opinion about her. She's a very, very bright person, and she's the first woman to have been chairperson of a winning presidential campaign. So she deserves some respect for that, whether you agree or disagree with her opinions. But the fake news part of it, and the alternative facts, and the fact that the Washington Post has now counted, and you may disagree with some of their individual points, but they have now counted 4,000 false, misleading claims or outright lies just since Trump took office January 20th, 2017. This is a university with an honor code, and you signed it once when you were entering Darden. Every student here has signed it. I don't know how effective it is today. The students could answer that better, but in my day it was very, very effective. We all had nightmares about it. That's how effective it was. It's probably a good thing. How can we reconcile what we teach our students, or you teach your children or grandchildren, with the president's playing fast and loose with the facts or making them up?
We can't. In my opinion, we cannot. The president is a liar, and it took a really long time for people to say the president is a liar. People like to say he fudges the numbers, he's unconventional. He's a liar. And if you're okay with him being a liar, then you need to reconcile with the fact that you and are, in fact, okay with the president being a liar. Maybe some people, I've heard people say, a lot of my Republican friends have said, well, he doesn't tell the truth, but look what we're getting done. If you're okay with the president being a liar, then I think that's something people have to go home with that and go home at night with. I am someone that believes that who the president is matters and what the president says matters, and has far-reaching implications, not just for folks in the United States of America, but abroad. And I think because Donald Trump does not tell the truth, he has hurt us and will continue to hurt us. And again, we may not see this come to a head in a very catastrophic way ever, or we may not even see it come to a head sometime soon, but I think there will be consequences for these actions. And I think it's sad for people that make excuses for the fact that he lies.
I don't hear a lot of excuses for his lying.
I've heard some excuses now, Brit.
What I'll offer to you, Larry, is
Well, Brit is not finished
Let me
with his
just-
answer.
Bill Clinton was a liar too, and lied under oath. But Bill Clinton was a much more charming and skillful liar than Donald Trump is. Bill Clinton, in fact, was the most charming man I ever met, but that's another story. But what I would say about it, Trump's lies, it seems to me, most of them tend to be of two kinds. One of them is braggadocio. Everything's the best. It's the best in 100 years, the best in 1,000 years. It's the greatest. We did great in Puerto Rico. It's braggadocio. And it's argumentative, and it's arguably false, maybe arguably true, but essentially inconsequential. It doesn't set a good example. I don't approve of it. I hate to see it. But that's one piece of it. It's exaggerations and braggadocio. That is what most of his lies are about, which is not to say he should be telling them, but it's to say that, he's not under oath, as was Bill Clinton, for example, just to cite one. I remember Jim Wooten, who was a correspondent with me at ABC News, was covering Clinton in the early stages of the primary season, and he went down and he did an interview with him. When he came out and told me afterwards, he said, I sat there and I did an interview with him for about an hour, and everything he told me was a lie. Now, that may have been an exaggeration in itself, but what I'm saying is, this sort of thing is nothing new. Trump he has not raised it to an art form. His lies are crude, they're childish. He lies like a schoolboy. And for many of the same reasons, because he's very like a schoolboy, which is not to say he's a man of great integrity. He's obviously not. But we're down to here now where we're talking about people cheating on their wives as being something that. Remember, when Bill Clinton was doing it, Democrats were saying, "Oh, it's just about sex. It doesn't matter." Well, there you go. It's shoe on the other foot disease, which can be epidemic in Washington. It's a bipartisan ailment that affects both parties, and it's certainly doing so today.
All right, Mark.
I'd say that same answer I gave when asked at the White House podium. I think that our responsibility as public servants is to tell the truth to the American people. And when we fall short, we should be held accountable for that. And when we fall short, we should correct the record. And there's times when we as administration have failed to do that, undeniably.
The problem is, though, if you work for Donald Trump and if you want to continue working for Donald Trump, you've got to go out there and defend and justify and explain and enable his lies. We see his secretary. We see.
It's just not true.
Listen, when you see Sean Spicer go out the day after the swearing in, and say to the American people who have eyes.
Yeah. And
That it is the biggest, I mean, that is enabling, justifying, defending, and, continuing a stupid lie for the sake of performing for the one man whose judgment
And
matters.
so your point is that obviously then Sean would still be there, which he's not.
I
And what I would tell you
I
is
think Sean
I gave
isn't
the
still-
same answer to you tonight that I gave the White House podium, and I stayed there through roughly 2 years. And the president, I think, never questioned my answers, and he was always supportive of my
Fortunately for you,
appearances.
you weren't on the.
Well, maybe it's just fortunate for me. Maybe those of us who are in the White House actually have a better
it's-
perspective than yours.
I think it's fortunate for you that you weren't, you weren't the press secretary. Because if you were not going to be press secretary if you're not out there lying and defending the things he says.
Okay. Again, they're being so friendly about their disagreements, I think, and I'm appreciative. And I do think we've been too tough on the president in some ways. I really do, and I've got to even the score a little bit.
Why?
I heard several of you criticize him for narcissism and self-absorption. This is a university with lots of faculty members. Let me take, who has a question? Raise your hand. Glenn, you've got to pick somebody since you're the only person with a mic.
Hello? When you started this presentation, we had the film about what the center's goals are. And one of
God
them,
bless you, sir.
Yes. And besides the raising the money, the goal was to teach the next generation and our children about what it means to be citizens in a democracy. When the First Lady wore a jacket that said, "I really don't care, do you?" And everyone wanted to read into it all these other things. There was nothing else in it but exactly what we're looking at. The lying and this kind of weird lack of empathy, an understanding of really how people live in this world, and the separation that's being caused in this society. This is the mythological role of the presidency. And media, in my mind, and I know this is now not a question, I'm trying to make it a question. When I haven't heard the role of media, as McLuhan said, television and radio are trivial mediums. They always are. You can watch CNN, there's tremendous discussion about what just happened, and a second later, you have the most absurd commercial you can imagine. And it's that word surreal that you used is exactly, we're just driving ourselves crazy by taking this discussion and having the major platform for it be electronic media. That's my opinion.
Thank you, sir. And what the gentleman is really asking is, should we show that commercial again? That's what I heard. But you may have heard another piece of it, so I'm going to turn it over to the panel.
What I heard is, as a young person, as a millennial, I'm 28 years old, I do think that one of the important pieces of this moment that we're currently living in, and frankly, the important why the University of Virginia Center for Politics is important for young people like myself is because, and IOPs all over the country, is because at this point in time in history, so many young people are looking for ways to be engaged and to be involved. And we need spaces for young people to be engaged and be involved, but I also think we need spaces where young people are mixed in and thrown into the pot with folks that do not identify with them ideologically. I'm a progressive. That doesn't mean I believe everyone in the world should be a progressive. I have a certain set of things that I believe. But I feel as though and it just didn't happen because of Trump. This has been going on for a while. But I think now we're in a place where some people are trying to figure out how to have a high-level conversation even if we disagree. Some people are trying to figure out how we can sit in the room with people that may think different than us, not white supremacists, because I'm not going to sit next to any white supremacists. No neo-Nazis around these parts. But I can sit in the room with my conservative friends that I may not disagree with on anything except that we both went to Catholic school and we believe we should be engaged in our democracy. And so I don't think television gives us just that. I think that's why what's happening on this campus is important, but I also think that's why we have to encourage folks to be engaged locally. We have to be organically engaged, because if we waited for television to teach us how to engage with one another, I don't think we'd be learning a really great lesson per se. We don't get to dive deep into real conversations. We don't get to pick apart folks from their talking points. And oftentimes we don't see full representation. I can count on, maybe 2 hands, less than 2 hands, how many black women you can see on cable television on a regular basis. That's problematic. I can count on less than 1 hand how many Latina women you can see on television. I don't know any Muslim women that are on cable television on a regular basis, and that's problematic. So that's my answer.
There you go.
Look, when it comes to media, to me, it's almost like a Charles Dickens novel. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. I think that the media had gotten way too cozy with previous administrations because they like to go to the Christmas parties, because they like to go to the Easter egg roll, because they like the camaraderie. I think that this animosity that has developed between the Trump administration, between the president personally going after some people in the media, I think it's created some stars out there who have gone back to the roots of what true journalism is: fact-finding, not cowering to pressure, not being bullied. But I also think it's the worst of times in the media, because social media, because blogs and the platforms that we have right now give rise, and even networks, give rise to fake news. And to me, the entire notion of fake news is very difficult to combat. If somebody wants to believe that Bill and Hillary Clinton are running a sex ring out of the basement of a pizza shop that doesn't even have a basement, to the point where they show up with a gun to kill and rescue people, I don't know how you fight against that. And one of the things that I think we've lost, and where universities to me are so important, is the ability to embrace diversity of thought. Diversity shouldn't just be, having the gay person and the black person and the Latino woman and the Muslim woman. Diversity should be diversity of thought. And we are getting too used to only hanging out with and only listening to and only reading and only watching things that we agree with and that reaffirm what we already believe. That's why institutions like this are so important. That's why panels like this, where we don't agree, are so important. And that's why the donors in the front row should give more money to Larry's organization.
I didn't tell her to say that. I swear I didn't tell her to say that. All right, no, that's great. We can't have every panelist respond to every question. Glenn, who's next? Okay, there's one. Keep going up here because they're all anxious to ask their questions. Go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you so much for all of you guys coming out tonight. I have a question for you, Mark, specifically. My question is, what would you say to a 70-year-old man that discussed inappropriately grabbing one of your daughters?
The young people with the good questions.
Young people are tough. You wouldn't want them in the White House press room. Well, what do you think? Does anybody want to answer that? It's a tough question, but it's legitimate. Yeah. Well.
Let me answer it, if it's okay, from the way I addressed it with my children, because I have 2 young boys and a daughter, and express that there's very little that they don't see today. In fact, many of you may know that I'm now on CNN as a commentator, and it's not exactly a Trump-friendly audience. And so each time I appear, there's a lot of things that appear on social media that they see and have questions to say, Daddy, what does this mean? Or why would somebody say this about you? When it comes to the president's remarks, I think that I've expressed to my boys, I hope, taught them why I cherish and love the same woman that I've been married to for 21 years and why that's important to me, and the way that they should be treating women in their lives. At the time, you may know, I was chief of staff for Mike Pence. So during the campaign, I was on the staff with Mike. And when that event happened and the videos were released, my encouragement was that this is not something that anybody else can fix. the president himself is the one who needs to apologize for those remarks. And nobody else can be a character witness and go out and say, this is what we know or don't know of him. It's only something that he can apologize for, which he did. Whether you think was sufficient or not, he did go on TV and make that apology.
He hasn't apologized to God.
Anna, can you let me finish the question that was asked here?
You take too long.
I think one day when you run the center and you can moderate it, that'd be fine. But I try to share with you that that's the way I handled it with my family. Perhaps it's not the perfect way, but that was the best that I could do with our team.
Very legitimate and personal answer. Next, who's next?
I just want to thank you all also for coming to Charlottesville, Virginia, the night before a potential hurricane, and thank Dr. Sabato for convening this series. My question is, if the Trump White House is so disorganized and there's so much tumult going on, who's actually running things and keeping things growing and progressing, as some of you have said this evening? And if the presidency has truly changed, what is the role of the cabinet in all of this swirl that's going on? Are they in charge? Who's in charge? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mark, I think that's another one for you, at least to begin with.
I think very clearly the president's in charge. The president is somebody, there's different models of how to operate with inside a White House. Some view that they want to be sort of involved in everything and also operate kind of like a chief of staff. Some choose to delegate a lot more. This president very much wants the decisions to flow up to him and for him to be the one to make them. But I also will tell you, I think the president surrounded himself with a lot of great advisors. Anna may wish that they all resign, but I look at Mike Pompeo, I look at Jim Mattis and John Bolton and say that's one of the strongest national security teams our country's had. I look at the rest of his cabinet, including Alex Acosta, and I'm thankful that he's there. I look at the team at HHS and Alex Azar, and I'm thankful that he's there. And so I think the president has surrounded himself with very strong advisors, but there's no doubt that the internal operations of the White House, he very much wants to run himself.
Any other comments? All right, let's go to the next question. We're going to try to speed it up so more of you can ask your questions. Go ahead.
Hi. Hello? So first, I just want to say, Mark, I think your answer to the question about sexual assault was very disappointing. But anyway, do you think Trump will be elected, for any of you guys, do you think Trump will be reelected in 2020? And in what ways would you like to see the presidency change or stay the same after Trump?
Okay, we can let Mark skip because I think it's yes. I'm just being joking. Okay, go ahead. Who else wants to do it?
Look, I think if Donald Trump runs, I think he will be the Republican nominee, and I don't see anybody who can who can make a dent in the Republican nomination. Certainly not John Kasich, not Sass, not anybody that's out there. Maybe somebody that comes outside the box. As far as whether he can win or not, the one thing I learned the hard way in 2016 is not to underestimate Donald Trump. When he began running, we all thought there was no way he could win. The other 16 Republicans running in that primary didn't take him seriously, didn't really take him on for a long time because they thought there's no way, this is a joke, and let's not antagonize his supporters, so let's not take him on, this can't be serious. And he ended up winning. I also never underestimate the Democrats' ability to nominate mediocre candidates. And when I see what's happening on the Democratic side right now, it reminds me a lot of what happened on the Republican side in 2016, where you have so many people thinking of running or who are actually going to run who sound like each other, that they are, eating each other's piece of the pie. Christie, Rubio, Jeb, Kasich, they were, because there were 16, because they all sounded the same, because they were all fighting for the same piece of the pie, is that you could see, a Donald Trump, who was also very savvy, have a clear path that otherwise would not have happened. And I think the Democrats are all over the place also. So can he win? I hate to tell you, but yes.
Symone?
I don't think the Democrats all over the place. I think our presidential primary has yet to get started. Many folks are still trying to get through 2018. Look, I think that I am someone that actually that believes in the ability for anybody, anywhere, if they meet the requirements, can run for president, can run for anything they want. I think that's what's great about this country. Because had we waited on the coronation that everyone said was coming in 2016, Bernie Sanders wouldn't even been in the race. So I think that on the Democratic side, you will see about 12 people that put their name in the hat to run for president. Of those 12, 5 to 6 of those campaigns will be viable. I mean, they have money, they will have longevity to be able to crisscross from New Hampshire to California, because the Democratic primary in California this year, they start casting early vote ballots. The absentee ballots go out before voting in Iowa will happen this year. I don't even think people realize that. So you will have to be, candidates will in fact need to be everywhere. And I think that if a Democratic nominee emerges that unfortunately is inspiring, I don't think all our candidates have to be inspiring, but Democratic voters are fickle. Particularly young Democratic voters are fickle, and young people want to vote for somebody that inspires them. And for many young people, Hillary Clinton wasn't inspiring. So they didn't feel the need to go to the polls. For many young people, they just didn't like Hillary, so they didn't feel the need to go to the polls. So I think that if they can nominate a person that can excite the base and that campaign knocks doors, they can give Donald Trump a run for his money, because the Clinton campaign did not knock doors, go on the ground in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in places in Pennsylvania. They just did not go there. Bernie won Michigan in 2016 in the primary because we knocked doors, because we were on the ground. And so there was a depressed turnout. There was a lack of turnout on the Democratic side in the general election in 2016. Now, there were some other, yes, Donald Trump won the Electoral College. Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did. But I think that there is a Democratic candidate that could emerge that could beat Donald Trump. But if they do not run good ground games, if everyone puts all their money on television, Donald Trump will be reelected as president.
And let's give go ahead.
I do think that there's a huge spectrum within the Democratic side, like there is within the Republican Party. The difference is, I never hear Democrats say to each other, "You're a Democrat in name only. You don't agree with, Ocasio, leave the party. Or you don't agree with Nancy Pelosi, you should leave the party." That happens on the Republican side constantly, where people want to institute purity tests. And if you don't agree with Donald Trump, even if you've been a lifelong Republican, then you're a Republican in name only and you should leave the party. Hell no. I was a Republican when he was a Democrat. And I was a...
All right, let's not be too critical of the Democrats either. They've already achieved a lot. There are 326 million Americans. They've got it down to 9,000 for the presidential nomination in 2020. It'll let it sink in. It's a little funnier than you thought. Who's next?
Some comfort in the fact that Trump seems to have chosen a fairly strong cabinet, and frankly, I hope they all stay, because I would love to see his presidency successful. I also hope he's a flash in the pan in terms of his style, and I kept thinking, this is a smart guy. Eventually, he's going to see that every time he opens his mouth, he becomes the news, and the news is not what he's accomplishing. Now I'm not so sure that that's ever going to change. Do you see that at any point he will understand that his style is detrimental to his whole program and the things that he might succeed?
Look, I think one of his signature features is his immaturity. He is remarkably immature for a man of his age. And when you get to be 70, and if you're not mature by that time, the chances of getting there seem to me a little limited. So I don't think that this self-absorption and this tendency to lash out at people you wouldn't think he'd be bothered with is going to go away. On the other hand, it is worth noting, as we think about that, and we think about that undesirable quality in him, that he is the person who chose these people who are in his cabinet. And they aren't going to, these are the kind of people who don't stick around if they don't have some influence and aren't listened to. And I think the evidence is fairly clear that the people around him, and Mark has attested to this, that he listens to them, And sometimes he overrules them, and sometimes he doesn't. And the policy results, at least from a conservative perspective, which is at least one legitimate perspective, have been pretty good. And the action results, I mean, on this panel tonight, we have two people who are clearly sharply critical of President Trump. They have identified, it seems to me, basically one issue where his rash, go-ahead-with-it impulse has hurt, and that was the zero tolerance policy that led to the situation in which these young children were separated from their parents at the border. I would add one more, and that was the early drafting of what's been called the Muslim ban, which looked at clearly is not a Muslim ban, and the Supreme Court so ruled. But that was sloppily and poorly done. And those were not inconsequential, but they weren't permanent. And so what I would say is, yeah, he's not going to grow up, but for a man-child, he's not doing too badly.
I would also add Puerto Rico to that list.
I
would also add Puerto Rico to that
hurricane.
list.
What?
To the hurricane. I would also add I would also add the response to Hurricane Maria to that list, and the administration's just gross miscalculation and mishandling of that.
I would argue that's a failure of execution. Is there something about the policy he had that was wrong there? I don't think so. I think, look, presidents struggle with these natural disasters. We may be in for another one.
I would venture to say if we were talking about
Which
Texas
policy?
or Virginia and not Puerto Rico, perhaps the administration would have acted differently.
I understand your implication there, but which was the policy that led to the failure? What policy?
The lack of folks on the ground, the fact
That's
that there's
not
water,
policy.
that
That's
there was
not
water
policy.
sitting, that there were millions of bottles of water sitting on a tarmac in Puerto Rico.
That's not policy,
for
ma'am.
Virginia.
That is simply execution.
Okay, so
Well, we've seen things like $10 million being taken away from FEMA and given to ICE. That to me is troublesome. We've seen, what troubles me about, and I agree with you, I think, and as somebody, I live in Florida, dealing with natural disasters can be very challenging, particularly for a new administration. We saw George W. Bush struggle tremendously with it. But he recognized it, and he tried, and he's tried since to really, make amends. It bothers me tremendously that for almost a year, this administration and the government of Puerto Rico covered up 3,000 deaths. I don't even understand how that happened. And to me, that was a cover-up because they wanted to call it a success. And so I think that's a problem. I also blame Rosselló in Puerto Rico for that. I think the Puerto Rican people were failed by all levels of government, not just the federals.
All right, we've got time for one or two more questions, and it's up to Glenn to pick that one or two. Where are you? Okay, there we go. Got another student.
So I've got a question for Republicans. Talk a lot about the benefits of working with Trump being worth the costs of Trump being in office and his policies. And so I'm asking, are the benefits worth the costs? When you've got the court appointments and the tax cuts and all the other things that you want, but is it worth the cost of putting children in cages, of terrorizing immigrants, of emboldening white nationalists, of sitting through lie after lie after lie? The attacks on our intelligence community during a very serious investigation are fraying relationships with our allies, and at what point would he finally go too far that we say we need to get him out of office?
I considered it an enormous honor to have the opportunity to serve in the White House, and I grew to have great respect for the president and the vice president. I came in clearly with the vice president and grew to work with the president a lot more. I think that, there was a question about the media here tonight, and I do encourage you to research data on some of these allegations that get thrown out. And I know there'll be people on this panel who we could have another hour-long conversation about. The initial photos of children in cages were photos from the Obama era where they're being detained. The photos that represent what happened during our administration is a policy that goes back to the 1990s. And it goes back to a policy that was called the Flores Settlement. And the purpose of it was that young children were coming across the border, and in many cases, they had been physically and sexually abused. And so there was a decision that said, we should separate the child from the adult who brought them across the border in order to protect that child. That Flores decision from 1998 was codified into law in 2008, not during Donald Trump's presidency, in 2008. What they further decided is they said, what is an appropriate amount of time to keep them separated? And the court said it's 21 days. And after 21 days, you're required to release that child. If the parent is still going through, or the adult is still going through adjudication, then you release the child into the country freely. There's no returning back. In some cases, that child gets put in foster parents. In some cases, that child gets reunited with a distant family member, which in many cases is better for that child, no doubt. But what we also found is that people who were so-called coyotes and human traffickers knew that law and were intentionally finding children who in some cases were not related to them and saying, let me traffic you across the border because the United States law allows you to separate them. This policy is something that our Congress has screwed up for more than 20 years. The administration, the way we handled it, could have been better, undeniably. But to suggest on this panel and to sit here and to say this just happened because Trump did it is naive and it's factually wrong.
So it is intellectually dishonest, because I'm not going to allow anyone to sit here and tell me that I'm naive. It is intellectually dishonest to gloss over the fact that there was a policy change within the Trump administration. It is also intellectually dishonest to tell us to forget the fact that the Department of Homeland Security Secretary stood at the podium in the White House briefing room and said, this is that we can't do anything about it, so on and so forth, and then did an about face not 24 hours later. So I am the first one to say that the Obama administration deported more people than any other US president previously. They had a disastrous immigration policy. Immigration activists will tell you that the only reason there is DACA is because young people backed the administration, the Obama administration, into a corner and demanded they do something when Congress failed to act. And that is part of where DACA came from, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Do your research on that. So all I am saying here is that it was a policy change, a zero-tolerance policy change of the Trump administration that resulted in the catastrophe at the border.
All right. Yeah, let me let Brit weigh in, and then I'm getting a last question. Go ahead, Brit.
Don't sit here and call me naive.
I sit on the board. I sit on the board of a Christian youth home in the state of Virginia up near Manassas. And the population of that youth home, which takes some of the toughest cases from this country and is doing remarkable things, is split between such kids from this country, and these unaccompanied immigrant minors who the Department of Health and Human Services has in custody because they are separated from their parents at the border. The overwhelming majority of these kids who are separated from, who are at our border and are separated from their parents arrive that way. They are not separated at the border, they arrive separated. And they make these unspeakable, harrowing journeys, mostly from 3 Central American countries through Mexico under the worst possible circumstances and arrive at our border. And they are farmed out to institutions like the one where I'm on the board that take care of them until they can be placed with a family, where possible, a relative. The overwhelming majority arrive that way. Moreover, the staff that I've talked to at this youth home, where these kids are coming, they stay for about 60 days, their behavior, I should point out to you, is angelic. You know, you've got this split population between these American delinquents who are, you know, this is a last chance for them, and miracles are being done and turning their lives around. And these other kids, the contrast couldn't be sharper. These American kids are bucking broncos when they arrive. These kids who make this terrible journey through Mexico, mostly from Central American countries, arrive. They've never been treated so well. They've never been fed so well. They've never been loved so much because they come from terrible circumstances. This is what impels them to leave. And they say, a lot of them arrive and say they came with, those that were separated at the border say they fully expected to be separated at the border. Now look, it's clear that the policy, which was a zero tolerance for illegal immigrants, led inevitably, because of the court decision that Mark described, to the separation of these kids from the border. It wasn't the intention for that to happen, but it inevitably led to it. It was a mistake and it was rescinded. But we should have some context for this. And I am one who believes that these kids who make this harrowing journey to this country and have the wherewithal to get here, we should want them to stay here and become citizens.
Okay, and by the way, we have a whole separate event on immigration. We can argue about that for hours and hours on that night. Glenn, who have you chosen as the last questioner? And whoever it is, it better perform. It's totally up to you. The pressure is on you. Go ahead.
I just have a brief statement to make about, there's a comment that I've heard here tonight, and I've heard it quite a few times in the news, which is that the American people elected Donald Trump. That is inaccurate. Donald Trump was elected by the American electoral system. And I know, Mr. Short, you referenced the 63 million people who voted for Donald Trump, but I think we also have to remember there were 66 million people who did not vote for Donald Trump. So I hear this a lot in the news, and the other one that kills me is when a politician says the American people want such and so, because there's not any one thing that the American people want.
In our system, ma'am, the Electoral College is how we
Oh,
elect
I understand
president.
that.
And
I'm
only
not
that,
saying
and
it's
the
not a
popular
legal
vote,
election.
The popular vote is like yardage in a football game, hits in a baseball game. It is,
Exactly.
It is a statistic.
But don't say the American people
Well, who-
elected Donald Trump.
Well, which
say
people-
the
well, which
American
pe-
electoral system
Which people
elected
did?
Donald Trump.
Right.
Pardon me?
The Russian people.
Well,
Ma'am,
that could be true.
that was somebody else. That wasn't me. Let me just say this. I think we can all agree that I lost complete control at the end. What I want you to do, and I'm delighted to say that these four fantastic panelists have agreed to stay for a bit and talk to some of you. I've moderated probably hundreds of panels in a too long career. And a lot of them have four people who agree on everything and they're deadly dull. This was not one of those panels. Please join me in giving a great round of applause to these fantastic people. That was wonderful. You know, I had no idea you were going to. It is so impressive. You're going to be at this for 50 plus years.
A long time.
No, it's fantastic. You keep it up and get my students involved.
Thank you, absolutely.
Okay, terrific. You, hey, Leonard.
I'm gonna go.
I know it was tough on you. Point.